The rain came down in a solid, unforgiving sheet, a liquid wall that turned the world outside the car into a churning, impressionistic blur of neon and asphalt. It was the kind of relentless, soul-soaking downpour that made the city feel like it was drowning. James Morrison wasn't the kind of man who noticed the weather. His world was a climate-controlled ecosystem of boardrooms, private jets, and a sprawling mansion in the hills that was less a home and more a fortress. But tonight, something made him look. Through the rhythmic sweep of the Mercedes windshield wipers, he saw her, a lone figure, standing ramrod straight at a deserted bus stop on a forgotten, rain-swept street. He was already late, a cardinal sin in his meticulously scheduled life. He had a meeting in 20 minutes with investors who had flown in from Tokyo, a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars hanging in the balance. His entire life was a testament to the principle that time was money, and spontaneous acts of charity were a foolish, inefficient waste of both. And yet, he slammed on the brakes. The Mercedes, a machine of silent Teutonic perfection, hissed to a stop beside the curb. It wasn't pity that had made him stop. It was recognition. Something about the woman's bearing, the defiant stillness in her posture, cut through the curtain of rain and struck a deep, resonant chord within him. She was soaked to the bone, her military dress uniform, a garment designed for parades and ceremony, clinging to her frame, but she stood as if on a parade ground, her shoulders squared, her spine a rod of steel, enduring the storm with a stoicism that was both heartbreaking and profoundly familiar. Her medals pinned to her chest caught the faint, watery light of a distant street lamp, winking like fallen stars against the dark, wet fabric. She was a soldier who had clearly just returned from somewhere far away, somewhere very, very dangerous, only to be abandoned in a different kind of storm. James powered down the window, the cool, damp air, a shock in the car's warm, leather-scented interior. "Hey," he called out, his voice sharper, more commanding than he intended. "Are you going to stand there until you freeze to death?" The woman turned. Her face was a mask of exhaustion, but her eyes, when they met his, were ancient. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much, endured too much, and had come out the other side with a core of unbreakable, weary strength. "Thanks, sir, but I'm fine," she said, her voice low and steady, though he could see the shiver that racked her body. "No, you're not," he stated, a simple, irrefutable fact. He unlocked the doors. "Get in." "That's not a request." Lieutenant Diane Collins hesitated. At 32, after 3 tours in the Middle East, after a decade of navigating the treacherous, male-dominated world of the military, her instincts were finely honed, and every one of those instincts was screaming at her not to get into a car with a rich, powerful stranger. But there was something in this man's voice. It wasn't the slick, predatory tone of a man looking to take advantage. It was the clipped, non-negotiable authority of a commander, of someone who understood pain, who recognized it in others. With a final, weary sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, she pulled open the heavy door and slid into the passenger seat. The interior of the car was another universe. The scent of expensive leather and polished wood, the profound, womb-like silence, the gentle warmth emanating from the vents. It was a world away from the cold, harsh reality she had just been ejected into. "James Morrison," he introduced himself, extending a hand. His grip, when she took it, was firm, his hand calloused, a surprising contradiction to the smooth, privileged world his car suggested. "Lieutenant Collins," she replied, her own handshake, a testament to her military training. "Diane, where are we going, Lieutenant?" he asked, his eyes on the road as he pulled smoothly away from the curb. I don't know," she admitted, but words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Then we're going to my home," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror, his gaze sharp, analytical. "You look like someone who needs a safe place to process whatever fresh hell you just walked out of." Diane closed her eyes, leaning her head back against the soft leather. If he only knew. 3 hours ago, she had been standing in the office of her commanding officer on the military base she had called home for 10 years. She had been brutally and dishonorably discharged. False charges of insubordination, a fabricated history of disciplinary problems, her career, her pension, her benefits, her very identity, all of it erased, destroyed, because she had refused to stay silent, because she had dared to speak the truth about what she had witnessed on her last assignment. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice a low murmur. James was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the rain-slicked road ahead. "Because," he said finally, his voice hardening almost imperceptibly, I recognized the look of someone who has been betrayed by the very system she swore an oath to protect. It was a strange, deeply personal answer, coming from a man in a $200,000 Mercedes. Diane studied his profile, the firm jaw, the focused eyes, the subtle tension in his shoulders. There was a deep, profound sadness in him, a grief that all the money in the world could not erase. "Did you ever serve?" she asked softly. "My wife did," he replied, and the way he said it, in the past tense, told her everything she needed to know. "Before she discovered," he continued, his voice now as cold and hard as granite, "that some of the most dangerous enemies are the ones who wear the same uniform as you." The car turned off the main road and began to climb, winding its way through the hills. They passed through a pair of massive rattan gates and up a long tree-lined driveway. The mansion that emerged from the mist and rain was not just a house. It was a fortress. It looked like something out of a glossy architecture magazine, all clean lines, vast expanses of glass, and perfectly manicured lawns. But Diane, with her soldier's eyes, saw the other details. She saw the discreet state-of-the-art security, cameras positioned at every corner. She saw the reinforced gates, the motion sensors hidden in the landscaping. She saw the way James compulsively checked his phone as they approached. A man who had all the security money could buy, but who lived as if he were under constant, imminent threat. "Welcome to the fortress," he said, a small, humorless smile touching his lips as he brought the car to a stop under a covered portico. "My daughter will love meeting a real hero." Hero. The word echoed in Diane's mind with a bitter, searing irony. If only he knew. At that moment, she was technically homeless, jobless, and had exactly $312 to her name. She was a hero with no honor, a soldier with no army. But as she stepped out of the car and looked at the man standing before her, she saw something in his eyes that she had not seen in a very long time. He was not looking at her as a victim. He was not looking at her as a charity case. He was looking at her as an equal, as a fellow soldier, as someone who understood that the most brutal battles are not always fought on foreign soil, but in the quiet, carpeted corridors of power, in the silent, deadly war between truth and corruption. That, as they walked towards the massive carved wood front door, Diane had the distinct, unnerving feeling that she was not just entering a house, she was entering the command center of a storm that would test everything she had ever believed about justice, about loyalty, and about the true, bloody price of courage. Inside the mansion was a cavern of cool, minimalist elegance. It was beautiful, but it was not a home. It was a museum, a showroom, a space designed to impress, not to comfort. Diane's trained eyes immediately began to assess the room, a subconscious, ingrained habit she couldn't turn off. She noted the exits, the sightlines from the windows, the potential blind spots. It was the automatic, tactical behavior of a soldier, and it confirmed James's initial assessment of her. "Daddy," a soft voice called from the grand sweeping staircase. A girl of about 12 appeared on the landing. She had her father's intense, intelligent eyes, but her mother's soft curly hair, which framed a face that held a strange, premature maturity. "Emma, come down and meet Lieutenant Collins," James said, and the pride in his voice when he spoke to his daughter was a raw, beautiful thing. Diane, despite her own exhaustion and despair, felt her professional instincts kick in. She knelt down, bringing herself to the girl's eye level, a gesture of respect and non-aggression. "You can call me Diane," she said, her voice gentle. "Are you a real soldier?" Emma asked, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fascination. "I was," Diane replied, and the single word, spoken in the past tense, carried a universe of pain that James heard with perfect, heartbreaking clarity. Later, after Emma had gone to bed, James found Diane in the kitchen. She was staring out the massive window at the rain-swept city lights below, her posture as rigid and straight as it had been at the bus stop. He poured 2 mugs of coffee and placed one on the granite countertop beside her. "Do you want to talk about what happened today?" he asked quietly. She hesitated for a long moment, then, with a deep, shuddering breath, she began to speak. She told him everything. The story poured out of her, a torrent of injustice and betrayal that she had held inside for months. "3 months ago," she began, her voice low and controlled, "during my last mission in Afghanistan, I witnessed something I wasn't supposed to see." She paused, the words heavy in her throat. "My commanding officer, Colonel Bradley Mitchell, was diverting medical supplies, life-saving supplies, meant for the local Afghan civilians, for the children. He was selling them on the black market and pocketing the profits." Her hands, she noticed with a detached sense of surprise, were clenched into fists. "Soldiers under My command, American soldiers, were getting wounded in die fights, and we didn't have enough basic equipment, tourniquets, chest seals, blood plasma because he was financing a new mansion in Virginia with the proceeds. James leaned against the counter, his face a grim, unreadable mask. Did you report it? I followed the chain of command, she said, a bitter, ironic laugh escaping her lips. I went to Mitchell's second in command, a Major Stevens. He told me to focus on my own responsibilities and to not make waves. He said Mitchell was a powerful man with powerful friends. 2 weeks later, she continued, her voice now trembling with a barely suppressed rage. We were on a rescue operation. A helicopter went down. We took heavy fire. 3 of my soldiers were critically wounded. They bled out on the dirt because we didn't have the medical kits that could have saved them. Kits that Colonel Mitchell had sold to the highest bidder. The week before, what did you do? James asked, his voice a low growl. I did what any good soldier would do, she replied, her eyes flashing with a dangerous fire. I documented everything. I got printouts of the transaction logs. I got photographs of the supplies being loaded onto civilian trucks in the dead of night. I got audio recordings of conversations between Mitchell and his cronies, discussing prices and delivery points. She tapped the side of her head. And I memorized everything else. When she returned to the United States, she took her evidence, a meticulously compiled dossier of treason and corruption, straight to the Inspector General's office at the Pentagon. And they destroyed you for it, James said. The words a statement, not a question. Worse, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. They accused me of fabricating the evidence. They accused me of trying to extort a superior officer. They said I was a problem soldier with a history of insubordination, a history that miraculously appeared in my file overnight. She laughed. Again, a broken, hollow sound. Within 72 hours, my 10-year career, my pension, my medical benefits, all of it, gone, wiped clean. Is Mitchell still in command? Not only is he still in command, she said, her voice now trembling with a profound soul-deep fury. He was promoted to general last week. Meanwhile, I'm officially homeless, with $300 in the bank, and a tarnished military reputation. That means I can't even get a job as a security guard at a mall. James was silent for a long, heavy moment. Then he asked a question that surprised her. Do you still have the evidence? Everything, she confirmed. Backups in 5 different secure, encrypted locations. Why do you ask? She said, studying his face. Because, he said, his voice now taking on a new, dangerous edge. You may not be the first person General Mitchell has silenced. And maybe, he paused, choosing his words with a surgeon's precision. Maybe you've just found someone who knows how to use that evidence the right way. Diane raised an eyebrow. What kind of business did you say you run, Mr. Morrison? The kind, he replied, a slow, cold smile spreading across his face, that teaches powerful, corrupt men that not every war is fought in uniform. He stood up and walked over to a bookshelf in the adjoining study. He took down a simple, elegant silver frame. This was my wife, Rebecca, he said, his voice softening for the first time. The photo showed a beautiful, vibrant woman in an Air Force pilot's uniform, her medals gleaming on her chest, a radiant, confident smile on her lips. She discovered that her commanding officer was selling flight plans and intelligence to a private military contractor, who was then selling them to insurgent groups, information that resulted in the downing of 3 American helicopters. Diane felt her stomach sink. What happened to her? Suicide, James said, the word a piece of poison on his tongue. At least, that's what the official report said. He placed the photo back on the shelf with an almost reverential care. She called me the night before she died. She was excited. She said she had found something big, something that was going to be all over the papers the next morning. They found her body at 0600 hours. The silence between them was now filled with a shared, unspoken grief. After the funeral, James continued, his voice a low, flat monotone. I spent every penny I had, every waking moment, investigating her death. I uncovered a network of corruption that went all the way to the top of the military-industrial complex. But evidence isn't enough when the judges, the politicians, the generals, they're all in on it. So you gave up? James smiled, but there was no humor in it. It was the smile of a predator. I didn't give up, he said. I changed my strategy. I spent the last 5 years building a military technology empire, billion-dollar contracts with the Pentagon, relationships with senators, with generals, with investigative journalists. I built a fortress. He looked directly at Diane, his eyes burning with a cold, righteous fire. Sometimes, Lieutenant, to beat the system, you have to become bigger and more powerful than the system itself. He walked back to the kitchen island and opened a sleek, black laptop. I'm saying, he said, his fingers flying across the keyboard, that maybe it's time we teach General Bradley Mitchell a long overdue lesson about underestimating the people he considers disposable. At that exact moment, Diane's burner phone, the one she kept for emergencies, vibrated in her pocket. A text message from an unknown, encrypted number. Diane Collins, you should have learned to keep your mouth shut. Some truths cost more than a career. They cost lives. A friend. James saw the blood drain from her face. A threat. They know where I am, she whispered, her voice filled with a sudden, cold dread. No, James corrected her, his own voice now, the calm, steady voice of a commander in the field. They know where you were now. You're under my protection. And trust me, Lieutenant, he said, a dangerous glint in his eye. I have learned, the hard way, that the best defense is a swift, precise, and absolutely devastating offense. Diane looked at the man in front of her, and she saw not just a grieving husband, not just a billionaire single father, but a fellow soldier, a warrior engaged in a different kind of war. A war fought not with bullets and bombs, but with information, with strategy, and with a cold, patient, and unforgiving desire for justice. She had not stumbled into a stranger's house. She had stumbled into a command center, and for the first time in months, the broken, defeated part of her spirit began to stir, not with despair, but with a new, dangerous, and exhilarating sense of anticipation. General Mitchell had seriously, catastrophically underestimated who she really was, but more importantly, he had no idea, not a single clue, who she had just allied herself with. The war was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. The threat, delivered with the cold anonymity of a digital ghost, did not have the effect General Mitchell's cronies had intended. It was meant to terrorize, to isolate, to push Diane further into the shadows of despair. Instead, it was a spark. On dry tinder, the fear that had been a cold, constant companion for 3 days was burned away in a sudden, clarifying blaze of fury. The broken soldier was gone. In her place stood the warrior. James saw the transformation in her eyes. The haunted, weary look was replaced by a cold, hard fire. They just made a mistake, she said, her voice devoid of any tremor. They confirmed they're scared, and they gave us a timeline. They'll escalate, James agreed, his own mind already shifting into tactical mode. His kitchen, a space of granite and stainless steel, became a war room. He opened his laptop, and the screen came alive with a complex, encrypted interface. While you were telling me your story, my team was already working. We have a name for the shell company Mitchell was using to launder the money from the medical supplies. Diane leaned over the screen. A web of connections, of offshore accounts and dummy corporations, was already being mapped out by James's team. My team, he explained, is comprised mostly of ex-military intelligence and cybersecurity specialists. People like Rebecca, people who were burned by the system and now have a very particular set of skills, and a very deep-seated desire for payback. For the next 3 days, the mansion became a fortress in truth as well as in name. James's private security team, a quiet, efficient group of former Special Forces operators, materialized, securing the perimeter. Diane, for the first time in months, slept without a weapon under her pillow. She and James worked side by side at a strange and powerful alliance of 2 broken soldiers from 2 different wars, united by a common enemy. Diane, with her intimate knowledge of military procedure and her eidetic memory, provided the raw intelligence. She detailed Mitchell's command structure, his known associates, his operational habits. She gave James the names of other soldiers in her unit, men and women she trusted, who had also seen things they weren't supposed to see but had been too afraid to speak up. James, in turn, unleashed his vast technological and financial resources. His team of ghosts, as he called them, began a full-spectrum digital assault. They cracked encrypted servers, traced financial transactions through a labyrinth of international banks, and cross-referenced Diane's testimony with a mountain of data they had been compiling on military corruption for years. What they found was a cancer that ran far deeper than stolen medical supplies. General Bradley Mitchell was not just a corrupt officer, he was a kingpin. He was at the center of a vast network that dealt in illegal arms sales, bid rigging on multi-billion-dollar defense contracts, and the selling of classified intelligence to private military contractors. This is treason, Diane whispered, staring at a decrypted ledger that detailed the sale of drone surveillance data to a mercenary group operating in Africa. This is not just about money. People have died because of this. The most chilling discovery came on the third day. James's team, digging into the cold case of his wife's death, found a thread, a single, redacted name in a classified flight manifest from the week before Rebecca's suicide. The name of the officer who had signed off on the flight plan for the private contractor Rebecca was investigating. It was a young, ambitious major at the time, a man named Bradley Mitchell. He was there, James said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He was part of the cover-up that killed my wife. The war had just become intensely personal for both of them. Their strategy could not be a direct assault. Diane had already tried going through official channels, and the system had crushed her. They needed to dismantle Mitchell's empire from the outside in, using his own arrogance and his own power against him. Their first move was to contact Senator Patricia Williams. She was a formidable figure, a black woman in her 50s, a former military officer herself, and the ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. She was known for her fierce integrity and her utter contempt for the old boys network that still dominated the Pentagon. James had cultivated a relationship with her for years, occasionally feeding her anonymous tips about defense contract fraud. They met in a secure location, a private room at a quiet, old-school Washington, D.C. club. Diane, dressed in a simple but elegant suit that James's assistant had provided, laid out her case. She presented her evidence with a calm, irrefutable precision of a prosecutor. The transaction logs, the photos, the audio recordings. Senator Williams listened, her face a mask of stone. When Diane was finished, the senator was silent for a full minute. "Lieutenant Collins," she said finally, her voice filled with a cold, righteous anger. "I have been hearing whispers about General Mitchell for years, rumors of corruption, of abuses of power. But I have never had anything concrete. I have never had a witness with your credibility and your courage." She looked from Diane to James. "What you have brought me today is not just a scandal. It is a weapon, and I assure you, I know exactly how to use it." The plan they devised was a masterpiece of strategic warfare. It would be a three-front attack. Front 1. The political arena. Senator Williams would use her position on the committee to launch a surprise hearing on military procurement and equipment modernization. General Mitchell, who was, at that very moment, lobbying for increased funding for a new drone program, would be the star witness. It would be his moment in the spotlight, a chance to preen before the cameras and the powerful senators. He would walk into the hearing room confident, arrogant, and completely unaware that he was walking into an ambush. Front 2. The media. James's team had already prepared a series of detailed, heavily sourced dossiers. They would be delivered to a handful of trusted, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalists at precisely the moment the hearing began. The stories would break online while Mitchell was still on the stand, creating a media firestorm that would be impossible to contain or control. Front 3. The personal attack. This was Diane's role. She would be in the audience at the hearing, a ghost from Mitchell's past. At a pre-arranged signal from Senator Williams, she would stand and identify herself. She would not be an accuser. She would be a witness, invited by the committee, to provide relevant testimony. The night before the hearing, Diane couldn't sleep. She stood in the vast, silent living room of James's mansion, looking out at the city lights. In less than 12 hours she would face the man who had destroyed her life, the man who represented a system that had betrayed her at every turn. James found her there, a silhouette against the glass. "Nervous?" he asked softly. "Determined," she replied, turning to face him. "You've been planning this for 5 years, haven't you? Waiting for the right moment." "I've been preparing for it," he corrected her. "There's a difference, Rebecca. She would be proud of you, Diane. She would see you as a kindred spirit." "He really thought," Diane said, her voice a mixture of wonder and contempt, "that by taking my career, by leaving me homeless at a bus stop, he could destroy the truth." "Men like Mitchell always make the same mistake," James said, his own voice filled with a weary wisdom. "They confuse silencing the messenger with silencing the message." The next morning, as General Bradley Mitchell prepared for his triumphant presentation to Congress, adjusting the medals on his chest, rehearsing his talking points, completely unaware of the storm that was about to break over his head, Diane Collins adjusted the small, discreet lapel microphone that Senator Williams's staff had provided. She looked at her reflection in the mirror of the car that was taking her to the Capitol. In the past 72 hours, she had gone from a homeless, disgraced soldier to the centerpiece of a covert operation that could bring down one of the most powerful and corrupt generals in the military. But as the Capitol dome loomed, majestic and white against the crisp blue Washington sky, a single, cold question hammered at her mind. Had they underestimated him? Was it possible that a man who had risen so high, who had survived for so long in the shark-infested waters of the Pentagon, was truly this blind, this arrogant? It was then that her burner phone vibrated. A new message, from a new encrypted number. ICU found some powerful friends. Diane, too bad they don't know the whole truth about you. See you at the hearing. Someone who knows your darkest secret. Blood ran cold. Mitchell knew, he knew she was coming, and he had a weapon of his own. Something from her past. Something she had buried so deep she had almost forgotten it herself. The trap she and James had so carefully set was about to be sprung, but she was no longer sure who was the hunter, and who was the prey. The congressional hearing room was packed, a theater of power. The C-SPAN cameras were broadcasting live. General Bradley Mitchell stood at the podium, a picture of military confidence. His uniform laden with medals, his voice smooth and authoritative as he began his presentation on the need for increased funding for military equipment. In the audience, Diane sat, her heart a slow, steady drum. James sat 2 rows behind her, his laptop open, his finger hovering over the send button that would unleash a digital firestorm on the world's media. Honorable Senators, Mitchell began, our proposal aims to protect our brave soldiers with the most cutting-edge technology available. At the head of the committee, Senator Williams leaned toward her microphone. General Mitchell, she interrupted, her voice polite but firm. Before you continue, the committee would like to introduce a special witness who has some very relevant, first-hand information about your current operations in Afghanistan. Mitchell's confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Senator, I don't understand. Lieutenant Diane Collins, the senator called out. Please introduce yourself to the committee. As Diane rose slowly to her feet, a wave of shock rippled through the room. General Mitchell's face went white. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. Good morning, General Mitchell, Diane said, voice clear and strong, amplified by the microphone that a staffer had placed before her. Surprised to see me, Senator Williams, Mitchell stammered, trying to regain his composure. This woman was dishonorably discharged from the military for fabricating evidence against a superior officer, and it is precisely those allegations that she is here to testify about today, the senator replied coolly. But first, I believe the public deserves to know what Lieutenant Collins really discovered in Afghanistan. At the back of the room, James hit send. General Mitchell, Diane continued, her voice now ringing with a righteous fury. Do you remember this conversation? She held up a small, digital audio player. And then, his own voice, arrogant and corrupt, filled the hearing room. Colonel Stevens, those medical supplies are worth $50,000 on the black market. Send them to the usual contact, and transfer my share to the Cayman Islands account. The room erupted in a chaotic murmur. Mitchell lunged from his chair. This is a fake montage. Interesting, Senator Williams said calmly, as the screens in the room suddenly flickered to life. Because we also have these photographs. Images filled the screens. Mitchell supervising the loading of medical supply crates onto unmarked civilian trucks. And these bank records, James added, his voice booming from the back of the room as he projected financial statements showing $500,000 flowing into Mitchell's offshore accounts. Mitchell was losing control. He pointed a trembling finger at James. Who is this man? He has no authority here. I am James Morrison, CEO of Morrison Defense Technologies, James replied, a cold smile on his face. And I am the man who supplies 60% of the communications systems you have been using to coordinate your illegal operations, systems which, by a happy coincidence, automatically record and archive all communications for security purposes. The color drained from Mitchell's face. He realized the trap. He had been incriminated by the very technology he had championed. Senator, he pleaded, I can explain. General Mitchell, Diane interrupted, her voice cutting through his pathetic excuses. 3 of my soldiers died because you sold the medical equipment that could have saved their lives. Private Peterson, 22 years old. Private Williams, 24. Private Rodriguez, only 19. Her voice did not waver. They died in the dirt while you were buying your 3rd house in Virginia. The silence in the room was absolute. a monument to the gravity of her accusation. Mitchell, in a final, desperate gambit, played his last card. "You don't know the whole truth about her," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Diane. "Ask her about Operation Nightfall. Ask her about the civilians she killed." A new, shocked silence fell over the room. All eyes turned to Diane, but instead of flinching, instead of denying it, Diane smiled. A slow, cold, weary smile. "Thank you for bringing that up, General," she said. "That is exactly the lie you planted in my file after I confronted you about your corruption." She turned to the committee. "The official report on Operation Nightfall was altered. The original report, which I have here," she held up a document, "states that I saved 16 Afghan civilians during a terrorist attack, risking my own life to do so. And here," added Senator Williams, her voice like thunder, "is the recording of the order General Mitchell gave to have that report altered, and to create the false charges against Lieutenant Collins." Mitchell's own voice, panicked and furious, once again filled the room. "Destroy her reputation. Make up whatever you need to. She can't look like a hero when we're tearing her down." He slumped in his chair, the weight of his own words, his own lies, finally crushing him. The cameras captured every detail of his humiliation, his empire of corruption crumbling in real time, on national television. "General Mitchell," Diane said, her voice now soft, almost a whisper. "You said that some soldiers are a problem. You're right. Soldiers who refuse to remain silent when they see their own officers betraying their men. We are indeed a problem. For people like you." Hearing was adjourned. As military police escorted a sobbing, broken General Mitchell from the room, he passed Diane one last time. "You don't know what you've gotten yourself into," he hissed. Diane looked him straight in the eye. "General," she said, "in my 10 years of service, I've learned that there are two kinds of soldiers, those who protect the innocent, and those who protect themselves from the innocent. Today, the entire country found out which kind you are." As the doors closed behind him, Diane finally felt something she hadn't felt in months. Not revenge. Not triumph. Justice. And the difference was that revenge would have left her feeling empty, but justice was leaving her feeling whole.